give up phobias and prejudice of the Cold War and gradually refused, especially after the start of the special military operation, to see Russia as an equitable partner in countering terrorism. This issue was politicized by the West, and they promoted their own narrow and self-serving approaches instead of countering terrorism. The cooperation between Russia and European countries and the United States on countering terrorism was effectively frozen. We don't see from the collective West the real desire to consolidate efforts of the international community to fight terrorism. Quite the opposite. And it is demonstrated by such facts as detonation of Nord Stream pipelines and refusal to work with the Russian side to investigate consequences and circumstances of this terrorist attack. Moreover, the West has taken a line to infringe on the rights and interests of our country in the relevant international organizations and formats, and they are expelling our country from these formats. I'm talking about the suspension of Russia's participation in the Financial Action Task Force, and its participation was suspended for political grounds. They have introduced unjustified restrictions on our rights and powers in the consultations of parties to the Council of Europe Convention on the Prevention of Terrorism and its additional protocol, as well as the conference of the parties to the Council of Europe Convention on laundering, search, seizure and confiscation of the proceeds from crime and on the financing of terrorism. More than 20 years have shown that the rise in international terrorism was triggered by the external interference by the West in domestic affairs of sovereign states Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. Today, the United States and their allies openly support the criminal Kiev regime that is widely using terrorist methods through the money provided by the West against Russian civilians and the Russian civil infrastructure. After the launch of the special military operation, the West and the Americans have abandoned all the decencies, and they are using foreign mercenaries, including members of the international terrorist organizations, to support Ukraine. From our part, we should take into account the current situation, but nonetheless, we still support the idea that there is no alternative to the collective counterterrorism efforts, with the UN playing the central and coordinating role. We reaffirm our commitment to the interstate cooperation in countering terrorism with all interested parties in line with the developed international legal framework, recognition of the leading role of states and their competent authorities in countering terrorism, and admissibility of using these issues and terrorist groups themselves as a geopolitical tool and interference in domestic affairs and destabilization of regimes unwanted by the West, as well as reject double standards and hidden agendas. We also support cooperation within the framework of the United Nations Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the relevant mechanism, regional anti-terrorist structure of the SCO, BRICS, CIS and CSTO. But, however, I have so many facts about the terrorist activities of the Kiev regime, which are directly sponsored by the US, Great Britain. Kiev regime continues to terrorize Russian civilians in Russian regions. September 3rd, one of the Russian soldiers informed that he witnessed a new crime committed by the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, which is the brutal murder in the Kursk region. In the cold blood, they have shot down a father and his small child. They were trying to leave in a car one of the villages invaded by the Banderites. September 4th, the Russian mass media have acquired testimony of the Russian female on the Ukrainian drone attack on the civilian car, which a family of 6 used to evacuate Cherkasska village of the Kursk region. There was also a 2-year-old child. As a result of the attack, a woman was seriously wounded. September 4th, on the Ukrainian internet resources, a video was posted where Ukrainian soldiers were tormenting Russian soldiers in the Kursk region. The investigative committee opened a criminal investigation. September 7th, Ukrainian Nazis shelled a hospital in Horlovka, DPR. 5 people were wounded, including 1 underage girl. September 9th, the deputy chief of the main military political administration of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Apti Alaudinov, told the mass media that the members of the Akhmat Special Forces Unit found action cameras of the Ukrainian prisoner of war with a video footage where his fellow soldiers were beating civilians of the Kursk region. September 10th, the armed forces of Ukraine attempted a massive drone attack targeting central Russian regions. 144 drones were launched. All of them were shut down. 20 of them were shut down in the Moscow region. Unfortunately, there are wounded in the Ramenskoye Moscow region. A woman was killed. All of these crimes, the Kiev regime will be responsible for that. It will weigh on their consciousness, but the Kiev regime has no consciousness, and the same could be said about their Western patrons. That's the crime that they have committed. We're talking about their criminal terrorist activities. Russian law enforcement agencies are documenting everyone in each of these crimes, and all those responsible will be brought to justice. We call on international structures not to turn a blind eye to these heinous crimes of the Kiev regime of terrorist nature as well, and to assess them properly and not leave them without appropriate response. And now, punishment for the crimes. There are ongoing efforts to bring war criminals to justice. A terrorist and a diversionist of the Special Forces Unit of the Main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Lubas, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the attempted landing on the coast of Crimea and for the armed attack on the Russian servicemen. Rudik, a sapper of the sniper group of the Special Operation Brigade Azov, was sentenced to 18 years in prison for the robbery and organized by an organized group and for the ill treatment of the civilian population. The prosecution of the DPR has approved indictments against Latvian national Lukši, Georgian and Finnish nationals Rusitashvili and Odiradze Arima for the participation in combats on the Ukraine sides, and mercenaries were put on the international wanted list. September 3rd, the Investigative Committee of Russia has brought charges in absentia of massive killings against 4 colonels of the armed forces of Ukraine, Fedosenko, Hiroshevich, Matveish and Hrapach. September 4th, the 2nd Western District Military Court has sentenced the commander of the 27th Artillery Brigade of the armed forces of Ukraine, Hrapach, to the life imprisonment for organizing terrorist shellings of the Belgorod region. September 4th, the Supreme Court of the DPR has sentenced the Ukrainian commander of the snipers formation Velichko to the 25 years of prison for the murder of a civilian in Mariupol. I will highlight and underscore it again. No Ukrainian criminal or their henchmen will be able to get away with their crimes. And now all those who sponsor them, who support them and encourage them to commit crimes. September 6th, Germany hosted the 24th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in the Rammstein format. It was attended by Zelensky, and he tried to beg for additional air defense systems, and he tried to persuade its overseas patrons to allow the use of long-range missiles to strike deep into Russia. He wrote in his Telegram channel, such permission to use long-range missiles is necessary to give Moscow an incentive to pursue peace. So, doesn't he have consciousness? Doesn't he feel guilty? But what guilt can we talk about when we talk about Zelensky? We should talk about amnesia, loss of memory. It is the Bank of West Street, under pressured by the British official Boris Johnson, stopped negotiations with Moscow, negotiations that it asked for. Zelensky signed a decree, or how they call it in Ukraine, that now Ukrainian officials are forbidden to have negotiations with Russia, and now they talk about peace. The response of the West was expectable, but nonetheless, Zelensky was discouraged. By speaking in Italy at the 50th session of the forum in Chernobyl, organized by the local analytical center Ambrosetti, the head of the Kiev junta expressed his frustration with the affairs of the Western partners and the fact that Ukraine cannot strike Kremlin. But nonetheless, the West didn't leave its puppets without new shipments of military assistance. Sweden has announced $440 million, and United States announced their intention to spend $250 million. And Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands didn't fall behind. They will send rockets for the HIMARS, multiple rocket launch systems, artillery systems, ammunition, patrol boats, and armored vehicles. All of that confirms the Western line to continue the conflict and to exacerbate it, since they have no regard what will happen to Ukraine and Ukrainians. It is obvious that it is fraught with uncontrolled escalation, but yet they don't realize it. Let's hear what the Prime Minister of the Netherlands have stated. During his visit to Ukraine on September 2nd, Dick Hoff approved the Ukrainian shellings of the Russian power stations and oil storages. If you follow his logic, these facilities are not civil infrastructure, since people don't live there. But again, according to him, people don't live in boats, people don't live in trains, people don't live in means of transportation. Probably people in the Netherlands live in the subway. They go there and live in trains. It's so ridiculous. Since, according to Dick Hoff, since people don't live in oil storage facilities and power stations, it means that these facilities could be attacked. I need to remind to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands that people don't live in hospitals, schools. I have never heard that people would live, for example, in shops or in other social facilities. Yes, they could work there, they could buy groceries, go there for treatment. They take their kids there, but they don't live there. Such an interesting logic of the Netherlands, but at the same time, when the armed forces of Russia have attacked military targets, in particular the training center of the military communication specialists in Poltava, have caused outrage, outcry and hysteria among Kiev supporters. Earlier they would talk about double standards, but these are not double standards. This is the over-the-top cynicism. We have recorded new illegal crossings of the Russian border by the Western journalists during the press tours to the Kursk region of Russia organized by the Banderites in particular on September 1st and 4th. Tendentious reports and publications praising the pseudo-humanity of the Ukrainian soldiers that invaded the Kursk region were published in the Swiss Resources Neue Zürcher Zeitung am Sonntag, our Gauer Zeitung, and they were written by Peldin Match, and the same materials were published at the Australian ABC company by Dixon Yang.
But what a shame. The aforementioned Pelda couldn't help but publicly complaining Kiev censors. They forbade him for publishing 5 photos and videos showing a civilian car that was destroyed and a postal bus whose wheels were removed. Of course, we're following all these reports, and law enforcement bodies are now investigating the way how those reporters came to the Russian territory, and they're making decisions according to the Russian legislation. And I can I should mention that on the 6th of September, the National Museum of the History of Ukraine opened an exhibition called Beyond One's Native Land. It's dedicated to the defense operation of the FU in the Kursk region. The exhibits include, for example, broken nose, barbarously destroyed, of a barbarously destroyed monument to Vladimir Lenin, destroyed by Banderites, military insignia and patches and stage photos taken at gunpoint. They're aimed at dehumanization of civilians in our border areas. At the same time, the exhibition's organizers attempted to justify historical claims of the Kiev on the Kursk region. They argued that this region of the Russian Federation allegedly was the northwestern part of the biggest historical and geographical region of Ukraine, Slobozhanщина, from time immemorial. That was a quote. To be even more convincing, they referenced some artifacts of Ivan Mazepa epoch. The Cossack colonization, they said, or liberation war, quote-unquote, of the beginning of the 20th century. Well, it's like a nut house. This exhibition demonstrates an only thing, the real meaning of this reckless scheme of the AFU. And to my mind, that's the truth that they hide from those drafted to the Ukrainian army. I don't have any other explanation. That's atrocious and tragic and comical at the same time. Just to imagine that anybody would really believe in those long-term objectives of the Kiev regime on this Russian territory is impossible. This is just a PR action, like a promotion that Zelensky needs to pay off the money that he receives. One of the crime, it's a testament to the crimes committed by Banderites on our territory. Now, on the so-called mobilization on Ukraine and on desertion. Well, there's a staggering number of desertion cases in Ukraine, and Ukrainians are still forcefully drafted like cattle for slaughter. Well, they're drafted to thinning ranks of the AFU. The internet is replete with reports and videos of eyewitnesses. They're saying that they saw employees of territorial recruiting centers beating conscripts. Those people hunters are like fascist auxiliary policemen and Ukraine collaborators during the Great Patriotic War. This lawlessness is causing even more hate among the population. We've seen an increasing number of cars set on fire belonging to the employees of these centers. They're being attacked by cold steel and firearms. It's like a Hollywood film about a bloody Joker, a clown with a bloody smile. A clown that was just randomly came to power. People paid a lot of money for it, and he's just joking, laughing at people. That's what Zelensky is like. But the scenario was written in Hollywood, in the US. The fate of a forcefully drafted is tragic. Captured Ukro Nazis confirm that the leadership of the AFU is feeding the soldiers into the meat grinder, and who refuses to go are just shot on the spot. They parasitize on their own people. They're deliberately destroying the Ukrainian people. And against this backdrop, the Zelensky regime seriously considered the creation of a ministry of returning Ukrainians from abroad. It's like a comeback ministry, so to speak. The collective West requiring output for their help would approve of this initiatives. Well, they have to create an impression, maybe to capture some Ukrainians who want to voluntarily come back. Recently, the ex-Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, said that Ukraine hasn't had a massive mobilization yet. Johnson said they're not drafting guys younger than 25 years old, but Boris Johnson would like to see that. Ukrainian media say that initiatives to lower mobilizations are already underway. It's obvious that the Kiev regime received some recommendations from beyond, and these aforementioned facts confirm the relevance of the goals of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, eliminate threats coming from its territory, and the goals that the Russian government said would be certainly fulfilled. Let me talk about the 8th of September. Donbass celebrated the 81st anniversary of liberation from fascist invaders. In 1943, the offensive of southern and southwestern France was possible thanks to the success in the Battle of Kursk. During the offensive, the Red Army crushed 13 enemy divisions, and in Donbass was the place where the springboard was created for liberating the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. On the 22nd of September 1943, the enemy was pushed beyond Dnieper. The Soviet troops were liberating these lands and were pushing the enemy back. On the 22nd December 1943, the enemy was pushed beyond Dnieper. And as a result of this fighting, 66,000 Soviet soldiers and officers died, and more than 200,000 were wounded. But history repeats itself always. In 1941-43, there were flags on buildings in Donetsk, flags of fascist Germany and Ukrainian collaborators. Today we're fighting against their ideological successors. And now, as well as like back then, on the battlefield we'll see military equipment burning. We are wishing, all of us, the fastest and decisive victory over Nazism. Now, to Moldova. We see this catastrophe that the West tried in Ukraine already. The anti-Russian rhetoric is taking increasingly grotesque forms as presidential elections planned for the 20th October and the referendum on joining the European Union approach. On the 3rd of September, Foreign Minister Mikhail Popshoy said that Russia is putting Moldova to the test and is harmfully affecting it. On the 5th of September, Maria Sandu said on television that the Kremlin, which I find funny, supposedly is spending $2 million a month to vilify her image. Well, dear Maria Sandu, everybody knows that it's not possible. This money would only suffice to improve your image just a little bit. But you know what? I have my doubts that this money would be enough. But to vilify your image, as you say, we don't need any money. It's not possible to do. What you did, you worsened your image to the point where it's not possible to go even deeper. In Moldova, there is a fight against dissent. The independent media in opposition are being persecuted, and the grading system of education is taking form. The Moldovan Ministry for Education threatened to reconsider the financing of those education institutions where, during the beginning of the new academic year events, opposition politicians took part. Well, how do you like that? One teacher was audited. After that, she refused to glorify a bright European future. There is a continuing persecution of priests of the Moldovan Orthodox Church. They are being accused of ties with Russia because of their pilgrimages to Russia. There are calls to, quote-unquote, involve competent bodies. This issue is just absurd. The Moldovan Orthodox Church is a part of the self-governing part of the Russian Orthodox Church and maintains ties with the Moscow Patriarchate. It's okay, it's normal. Maria Sandu divides people into loyal and disloyal ones. And it's made based on confessional affiliation and place of residence. At the end of August, Moldovan banks said that they would stop working with the only payment system which allows for transferring money between Russia and Moldavia. Those Moldavians working in our country lost the opportunity to help their family members in Moldova. Those people, those Moldovans who come to Russia and get an opportunity to work here, get their money, get their paychecks, and send their money to their homeland. That's who Maria Sandu attacked. A lot of people left Moldova, working population people. Experts prognosticate that by 2030, number of Moldovans born abroad will exceed the number of those who was born in Moldova. At the same, who's to blame, Maya Sandu? At the same time, the authorities pretend that the depopulation does not happen. But the spokesperson of the government, the citizens do not leave Moldova for good. What do you think they're doing? The government, the Moldovan government, thinks that they're just, traveling. It's not a surprise that the negative ratings of the Moldovan leadership are at an all-time high. Latest surveys show that 57% of the population have a negative attitude to Maya Sandu. 60% of the people have a negative attitude to Prime Minister. 63% have a negative attitude towards the Speaker of the Parliament, and 75% of Moldovans are sure that ruling party politicians are corrupt, and 69% think that the justice system is now controlled politically by the authorities. They're not trying to recover the economy, improve the well-being of the population, but they're organizing an endless series of visits to the Republic of high-ranking emissaries from the European Union countries who praise the Moldovan leadership for some kind of successes that nobody sees except for them. They shake their hands, they tap them on their shoulders, and thank them for the stability in the Republic. Well, maybe that's some kind of stability where there is no economic growth, no development of science, of education. Well, that's their kind of development, We see that this Western story that repeats itself year after year in different parts of the planet does not work. We call upon Moldovan authorities to abandon the Russophobian policies. Listen to your people. You still call them Moldovans, not Romanians, but maybe it's just a matter of time. Maybe you really hope that you can do more in your hate towards everything Moldovan, taking into account that you rely upon a certain political force fighting for the humanization of Moldova. Well, let me say this. The people entrusted Moldova with their fate, with their life. Those are people who promised to take care of Moldovans. But it turns out that the Moldovan authorities only care about two things. Firstly, about the West, because they get money from them, and about themselves. That's it. Now let's talk about the West. We heard the reports about MI6 and FBR. We heard reports. There was a weekend festival. It was. We heard accusations towards our country, destructive attitudes towards Russia and their intentions, and they're going to pursue escalation and international tensions. In particular, they both said that, quote-unquote, the offensive of the AFU caused some sort of doubts in Russian elites about the certain situation. And they also noted that it would be not correct to confuse the strong authorities. The Kursk offensive would lead common Russians to a war. They don't know what kind of data they use, MI6, FBR, it's hard to say. Maybe the Kiev regime is giving them fake news. Well, could you please pass those words when you hold a next festival with the participation of intelligence services of Britain and the US? After this invasion into our country of the Kiev regime, and we understand that now we're talking about Western countries first and foremost. What was the quote again? The Russian elites, common Russians, were deprived of their illusions, what Washington and London believes in when it comes to our country. And the US and Britain said themselves that they want to inflict a strategic defeat upon Russia. And it was actually implemented through the strikes in the Kursk region. So please don't have these illusions. MI6 and FBR say allegedly that somebody has sympathy for the Western countries. No, it's not like that. There was a strike on Ramenskaya. We understand that the Kiev regime is just a tool. It's just a proxy that is being used by Washington and London. Let's take MI6, CIA. Is there some kind of a legend that our citizens don't understand who is behind all of this? Is it really true that somebody thinks that somewhere in the British or American intelligence services, somebody thinks that people don't understand that that's the West who's behind all of this? They do their utmost that the Kiev regime and their hirelings can commit terrorist acts against Russian citizens. Everybody understands everything. William Burns said some comments on Russian president. He was smart enough to reference in a murder attempt on Skripal in London. He said Russian spies are more reckless in Britain, in other places, and Russian intelligence services, getting their act out of hand. Where they're still referencing the Skripal case, maybe they can show them. We hope that British intelligence services are still close to reality, understand what's happening, and know where the Skripals are. You know that the American and British intelligence services try to destabilize the internal situation in our country. If somebody hopes in Britain or in the US to use this so-called non-systemic opposition in Russia, who obviously work not as agent of influence, if they try to encourage that opposition, so that they organize some violent protests and so on and so forth. Well, in this case, I can say that this will not happen. This is a miscalculation. The Russian society understands pretty well what the goals are of this activities by London and Washington and all their satellites. And the Russian society only consolidates itself in front of their enemies. We don't have any doubts that all the terrorist acts committed in our country are committed by the US, Britain, and NATO countries. I would like to say some other word, but I would say community. Okay, we understand pretty well that the collective West declared Russia its main enemy. The Great Britain and US will continue to use all tools at their disposal to fight against us. The feeding of Kiev regime, to pumping Kiev regime by warfare will continue until they can fight until the last Ukrainian. And we see that the intentions of the Anglo-Saxons are to switch our country off, to diminish our powers, and to make it according to their own template. This will not happen. We have warned British officials, American officials, the heads of the diplomatic missions, that the interfering into our actions is not allowed. Interfering into elections and subversive acts will be prosecuted, and the persons could be designated persona non grata and deported from the country. What does it mean when they say so? Anglo-Saxons have consolidated their efforts against our country. They are using the Kiev regime to implement their geopolitical objectives. And these are those powers who form these aggressive policies in the world.
That's precisely they who formed the concept of the military defeat on a battlefield, which will fail. and they are supported by the Finnish president. Attention has been drawn to another string of anti-Russian statements by the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, who is in a radio program An Hour with the President, spoke on Russia as the number one threat to Finland. He also admired by the courage of the Finnish mercenaries fighting as a part of neo-Nazis Ukrainian formations. So he's being admired by the Finnish mercenaries fighting against Russia. We will remember and we will remind Alexander Stubb his own words. Time permits. Such Russophobic maxims, which have become the norm for the Finnish authorities of late, make us think how hypocritical were the calls for the good neighborliness and building a united Europe without dividing lines on the basis of taking into account the interest of all states of the continent. If he would say that it was till 2021, so we will remind about Madam Merkel and other politicians, the words about Ukraine. By deciding to join NATO, Finland has become one of the small non-decisive member states of the alliance. It can only follow the path of the Baltic states, whose entire independence in the wake of policies dictated from Washington and NATO Brussels is reduced to inverting new anti-Russian narratives. Talking about the Russophobic in the territory of Finland, we would like to draw your attention in Imatra, Joensuu and Vapenranta. This school, or these towns, used to develop ties with Russia. Finnish tabloids, citing certain sources in the field of foreign and security policy, accused the school of creating a quote, possible threats to national security. Once again, there are calls to close these institutions. And it should be particularly emphasized that the school in question is a Finnish school with Finnish curricula. Such accusation didn't stop who are looking for another anti-Russian pretext in order to pursue this Russophobic policy. Such accusations could be regarded as ridiculous and unimportant. What threat to national security could school children pose? However, we regret to note that the forces for whom the word Russian is equivalent to the word hostile, and aggressive.
In 1373 that has established the Counterterrorism Committee as the relevant subsidiary body of the UN Security Council, and this decision has provided a powerful boost and laid the foundation of the multilateral counterterrorism cooperation all over the world. However, later the situation started to develop along another scenario. The collective West, led by the United States, couldn't give up phobias and prejudice of the Cold War and gradually refused, especially after the start of the special military operation, to see Russia as an equitable partner in countering terrorism. This issue was politicized by the West, and they promoted their own narrow and self-serving approaches instead of countering terrorism. The cooperation between Russia and European countries and the United States on countering terrorism was effectively frozen. We don't see from the collective West the real desire to consolidate efforts of the international community to fight terrorism. Quite the opposite. And it is demonstrated by such facts as detonation of Nord Stream pipelines and refusal to work with the Russian side to investigate consequences and circumstances of this terrorist attack. Moreover, the West has taken a line to infringe on the rights and interests of our country in the relevant international organizations and formats, and they are expelling our country from these formats. I'm talking about the suspension of Russia's participation in the Financial Action Task Force, and its participation was suspended for political grounds. They have introduced unjustified restrictions on our rights and powers in the consultations of parties to the Council of Europe Convention on the Prevention of Terrorism and its additional protocol, as well as the Conference of the Parties to the Council of Europe Convention on laundering, search, seizure and confiscation of the proceeds from crime and on the financing of terrorism. More than 20 years have shown that the rise in international terrorism was triggered by the external interference by the West in domestic affairs of sovereign states Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. Today, the United States and
all these towns used to develop ties with Russia. Finnish tabloids, citing certain sources in the field of foreign and security policy, accused the school of creating a, quote, possible threats to national security. Once again, there are calls to close these institutions. And it should be particularly emphasized that the school in question is a Finnish school with Finnish curricula. Such accusation didn't stop who are looking for another anti-Russian pretext in order to pursue this Russophobic policy. Such accusations could be regarded as ridiculous and unimportant. What threat to national security could school children pose? However, we regret to note that the forces for whom the word Russian is equivalent to the word hostile and aggressive.
allies openly support the criminal Kiev regime that is widely using terrorist methods through the money provided by the West against Russian civilians and the Russian civil infrastructure. After the launch of the special military operation, the West and the Americans have abandoned all the decencies, and they are using foreign mercenaries, including members of the international terrorist organizations, to support Ukraine. From our part, we should take into account the current situation, but nonetheless, we still support the idea that there is no alternative to the collective counterterrorism efforts, with the UN playing the central and coordinating role. We reaffirm our commitment to the interstate cooperation in countering terrorism with all interested parties in line with the developed international legal framework, recognition of the leading role of states and their competent authorities in countering terrorism, and admissibility of using these issues and terrorist groups themselves as a geopolitical tool and interference in domestic affairs and destabilization of regimes unwanted by the West, as well as reject double standards and hidden agendas. We also support cooperation within the framework of the United Nations Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the relevant mechanism, regional anti-terrorist structure of the SCO, BRICS, CIS and CSTO. But, however, I have so many facts about the terrorist activities of the Kiev regime, which are directly sponsored by the US, Great Britain. Kiev regime continues to terrorize Russian civilians in Russian regions. September 3rd, one of the Russian soldiers informed that he witnessed a new crime committed by the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, which is the brutal murder in the Kursk region. In the cold blood, they have shot down a father and his small child. They were trying to leave in a car one of the villages invaded by the Banderites. September 4th, the Russian mass media have acquired testimony of the Russian female on the Ukrainian drone attack on the civilian car, which a family of 6 used to evacuate Cherkasska-Prechna village of the Kursk region. There was also a 2-year-old child. As a result of the attack, a woman was seriously wounded. September 4th, on the Ukrainian internet resources, a video was posted where Ukrainian soldiers were tormenting Russian soldiers in the Kursk region. The investigative committee opened a criminal investigation. September 7th, Ukrainian Nazis shelled a hospital in Horlovka, DPR. 5 people were wounded, including 1 underage girl. September 9th, the deputy chief of the main military political administration of the